The Law of Hammurabi is one of the oldest law codes we have in the world, and also one of the most complete from the Bronze Age, and thus represents a very good insight into those times in the area of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, during the 18th century BC when Hammurabi ruled, and for later periods, as his law would be followed by later rulers. Regarding the Law of Hammurabi, it is actually not made by Hammurabi himself, if you look at it in certain ways. For example, in the official statement of the law itself, it is claimed that the sun god of death and disease, Nergal-Shamash, is the one that has given Hammurabi the law. Hammurabi is here a prophet that has received a divine revelation from Shamash in the form of a concrete, righteous law to apply and spread throughout the realm in order to establish righteousness, as depicted here with Hammurabi being given the law from the sun god. Hammurabi, the king of righteousness, on whom Shamash has conferred law, am I. When you read the statements about the law found on the stele of Hammurabi, it is quite clear that this is not supposed to be interpreted as a man-made law made by Hammurabi himself. Rather, it is a divine law, directly from the divine, and not by Hammurabi ruling and making laws on the god's behalf, and thus much more legitimate than just a human law based upon human whim. Thus, this law is actually a religious matter, and the judges, when they are mentioned in the Law of Hammurabi, are actually a type of priest versed in religion because of this. And the law being from the divine also gives it legitimacy in its implementation, something which is very important in societies before modern systems of bureaucracy and government, where the centralized power of the state is weak or non-existent, and you have to rely upon the willingness of people to comply with rules that they can see as legitimate. And few things are as legitimate as direct divine will in the form of law. Now, of course, this is how the law would have looked like from the viewpoint of the Babylonian believers who followed this law back during those ancient days of the Bronze Age. From an historical outside perspective though, the law itself also contains a lot of what seems to be elements from even older law codes found in the Middle East and in Mesopotamia in particular, as we have found previous law tablets dating several hundreds of years before the time of Hammurabi with similar laws. As stated before, the stone with the law code of Hammurabi claims to be of direct divine origin and not to come from previous law or previous revelations. But in reality, the law is probably copied from previous cultures and previous law codes. On the subject of copying, there is also a debate about if this law code of Hammurabi have influenced later law in the Jewish Tanakh. After all, the early Israelites were exiled to Babylon in the past, where they would have been exposed to the law code of Hammurabi, just through sheer cultural proximity, if they had not heard about the law code of Hammurabi before, through contacts with Mesopotamian culture before. The Bronze Age Middle East, and also the later ancient Middle East, was a lot more interconnected than most think, with trade between Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even the area of modern-day India. It is thus not entirely unlikely that the early Israelites were influenced by Mesopotamian civilization, in the case of the law code of Hammurabi. However, to which extent this influence has influenced Jewish traditions remains a subject of debate. When it comes to the content of the law code itself, a lot has been made about the harshness of many of the laws, with the death penalty for the majority of crimes of breaking the laws among the 282 laws found in the Code of Hammurabi. Yet, more interesting to note about the content of the legal text than the harshness of the punishments, considering the harshness of those times generally, is that it sets out a lot of social rules. Like a lot of later Middle Eastern law, such as the Jewish halakha or the Islamic sharia, the laws of Hammurabi mixes ceremonial rules what people in association to the temples and the divine can and cannot do, with clear legal laws about secular matters, as they are the same thing, as there is no distinction here between the religious and the secular, as all the laws found in the law of Hammurabi are from the god Shamash, and are thus religious, direct divine law, applicable to the totality of society. A law that has been sent down from the divine to establish divine justice on earth by divine will that stands above all of humanity. Sure, there exists slavery and a lot of inequality in the law between groups of society, as was common for this time and place, but the law is actually surprisingly clear in that the crimes that are committed shall have punishment and does not exclude leaders or others from this divine justice. As the reason for the divine law is so that the strong should not harm the weak. And the text inscription upon the stone of the Code of Hammurabi speaks about the well-being of the oppressed. It also explicitly forbids later rulers to change the law, and even makes it clear that rulers are subjects to the law themselves. As Hammurabi states about a later ruler,
"If he destroy the law which I have given, corrupt my words."
Hammurabi continues with a long list of statements about how a ruler that breaks the divine law or changes it will be cursed by the gods, and their law will be seen as unjust. And he also adds that the gods will cause
disorder and sedition for him.
The law being directly divine stands above man-made law made by human rulers. Rulers that came after Hammurabi became beholden to the law of Hammurabi, or rather the law of Shamash, as it was seen as divine, and thus in the eye of the people as more legitimate than later man-made law. Thus later Babylonian rulers became reluctant to change the law or replace it, as they had to respect the divine law and the various rights and enforcements within it, or it would be going against the will of the gods, and rebellion would become a legitimate reaction, as is hinted by Hammurabi himself in his statement about disorder and sedition for a ruler that breaks the law. In fact, you could even go so far as to say that Hammurabi more or less calls for rebellion and sedition by saying that bad things will happen to the people if a ruler breaks this divine law. Thus, he makes it a duty for the people, in a way, through the threat of consequence, to uphold the divine law and to hold rulers accountable in relation to it. This is not that different from later Middle Eastern law, in both the Jewish and the Islamic traditions, that calls for the believers to hold the rulership accountable in regards to divine will, or else face the consequences of divine punishment for being lax in their religious duty. It's not that dissimilar. And the practical effect of this meant that rulers following Hammurabi had reduced legislative power, but already having a legitimate law increased legitimacy in the enforcement of the law that is given from the divine. Rulers, even Hammurabi himself, are referred to as implementers of law, not makers of law in the Code of Hammurabi, and their rule is simply to manage the implementation of the god's will, not act with full power in place of the gods, as they are even subjects to the law themselves. And it is in this rule of implementers of the divine law that they have their great legitimacy after Hammurabi, as the executive arm of the divine on earth, rather than the legislator in place of the divine on earth. The rulership that is presented in the Code of Hammurabi is not an absolutist monarchy with a ruler given all the power to rule and make law however he sees fit. Instead, the law of Hammurabi represents in certain ways a concept of justice and holding rulership to a standard so that it does not become tyrannical, so that it does not break the divine justice, the divine social contract that the divine law represents. In this, Hammurabi's law is an early example of a long Middle Eastern tradition of divine law being a standard for good and just rulership, and as a law that has its legitimacy in the belief of the divine being above the human. This is the law of Hammurabi, the exalted prince who feared God. And hopefully, my viewers, you found this video about this law interesting. If you have any questions or other comments, please post them, as I love interacting with you. And also please push the like button. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة في مثلكم.